Good evening and welcome to Angus Connect. Tonight, the focus is on the Angus Sire Benchmarking Program, a program which in its 12th year continues to lead the way, not only in the contribution of performance recording for hard-to-measure traits, but also in facilitating a range of exciting R&D projects. Tonight's sessions have been pre-recorded, but if you have any questions regarding the content delivered, please don't hesitate to give staff at Angus Australia a call. Contact details can be found by visiting the Angus Australia website. The program for tonight is as follows, and it includes a great lineup of Angus Australia and guest presenters. Tonight's content would normally be delivered as part of the Angus Sire Benchmarking Open Day, a day which provides an update on the latest outcomes of the program and provides attendees with the opportunity to view the steers from the program in the past at the Tolimba Research Feedlot. Whilst we cannot be there in person this year, throughout tonight, the breaks between sessions will include footage of the current cohort of steers out of the Tolimba Research Feedlot. The final point before we begin tonight is we really appreciate feedback on the events we deliver, and I'd encourage you, if you have a moment, to complete the feedback on the event. It's only with your continued feedback that we can continue to deliver these events. We begin tonight with a group of presenters I hope everyone's familiar with. Angus Australia's current president, Sam White, and Angus Australia's Strategic Projects Manager, Christian Duff, lead us off, followed by AGBU's Deputy Director, Steve Miller, and a session exploring the role of reference populations. And finally, the current chair of the ASBP Consultative Committee, Steve Chase, will cover the value he as a breeder and cooperator herd participant in the ASBP gains from the outcomes of the program.
Hi, my name is Sam White. I'm the current President of Angus Australia and the Board Chair. Angus Australia has an ongoing commitment to research and development and is proud to have the opportunity to collaborate with organisations like CSIRO, UNE and CSU to enhance the delivery of the research programs for our members. In May 2021, the Angus Board has agreed to continue to support Angus Australian reference population known as the ASBP. We have agreed to the funding of 5 additional cohorts and at a budget of $3 million over 5 years. The importance of the ASBP to our members is to provide access to the most advanced technology with the highest accuracy to assist us all in making informed breeding decisions. With past ASBP cohorts, plus the additional 5 cohorts, we'll see 530 Angus sires involved in the program and 15,000 progeny comprehensively recorded. This is a massive and necessary undertaking by Angus Australia. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name's Christian Duff. I'm Strategic Projects Manager from Angus Australia. I'm actually manage the Angus Sire Benchmarking Program, the Australian Angus Reference Population Program. I've been doing so for 7 years. It's a great program to manage because it has such a large impact on a range of people, including our members obviously, but also up the supply chain. I'm just going to give you an overview of the ASBP in this session, just so we're aware about what it is, why we do it and where we're up to on a very broad level. So the first thing is to understand what the overall objective is of the ASBP, and from an Angus Australia perspective, as we see on the screen, it's to grow the phenotype and genotype reference population with contemporary Australian Angus animals, particularly for hard to measure traits, for enhanced genetic evaluation, collaborative research and innovative development. So it's an objective to cover a range of things, but particularly focused towards genetic gain and our genetic enhancement tools that we provide through Angus Australia to our members and to the industry. Before I get going and talking a bit more about the details of where we're up to, it's important we acknowledge all of our collaborators in this project, because without our collaborators and our partners, we wouldn't be able to do this ourselves as an organisation. That starts with our members, who obviously contribute a lot to the program, particularly through their bull ownerships and nominating and submitting bulls to the program. And that includes our AI companies as well, who will support the program with bull nominations and their commitment to it. We also have a range of cooperator herds who run their cows. Over the life of the project to date, we've had about 20 of those. So we've had a lot of cooperator herds that have offered cows forward and allow us to do our AI programs and our phenotyping on those animals. Importantly, we've had some really strong supply chain partners, Rangers Valley for a long time, and John D for a long time, and more recently Stockyard have come on board as well. Without those people helping us out with the supply chain end, we wouldn't make these programs work. Vetquinol is our partner for assisted reproduction, and without getting those cows in calf to the size we want to, we wouldn't have a program as well, so we really appreciate their partnership. We do lots of R&D collaboration, UNE, AGBU, CSIRO, New South Wales DPI, just to name a few, and they're important for this program as well, particularly for the output side. We can't forget MLA. MLA have been really supportive of this project for a long term. While they're not progressing to co-fund the core of the project, they are committed to previous cohorts and have really helped us get it up and going, so we appreciate that. Genomic companies are also important because the DNA component of this is really important, so our partners such as Zoetis and Negen really help out in that space. And I have to also mention all our Angus Australia staff who help out as well, particularly Nick Butcher, who's our field officer, but all the other people involved helping us get the data and getting the system and getting it analysed. It's really important. So in relation to the program and where we're up to, the program's been going since 2010. Cohorts 1 to 8 are finished, but we're currently have active 9 cohorts. Cohort 9, we basically finished collecting all the data, the carcass data and the heifer data on the heifer fertility data on the females. Jen Peart's going to present more on that in her session today. We've also, in cohort 10, we've collecting all the yearling data on those. Steers are starting to come into Talimba feedlot and collect that data. And heifers are being joined for calving next year to get that fertility data. Cohort 11, we finished calving and we're getting that data together to put into the system. In cohort 12, as of this week, we'll be finished the joining program there. So it rolls on, but we have got planned in front of us an additional 5 cohorts above that. And that will take us through to 2029 to collect lots of data, basically on 550 Angus bulls going into the program, size of these progeny, to create 7,750 steers and the same number of heifers, comprehensively phenotyped and genotyped for our reference. So where's it going at this stage in regards to the size of our reference population? Because this is really what underpins the value we're getting out of it. So what data actually is being collected and going in to drive our genetic evaluation, along with all the other data we've got, pedigree and phenotypes, to really help us make better breeding decisions. In relation to the number of animals genotyped, we've now got nearly 170,000 animals going into our evaluation, and a range of those have a number of phenotypes recorded. Well over 100,000, say, for birth weight and weaning weight. But for other traits, that's where we need these reference populations to fill the gaps that we can't get in industry. And this next slide and this next graph I'm showing you here really shows the hard to measure traits that we are focused on in the Angus Sire Benchmarking Program in our reference population. It's not the only source it's coming from. There's other programs and there's other good industry and member programs out there that are contributing to this, but primarily most of this data showing you, which is around that 5,000 phenotype mark on contemporary animals, is coming from our Sire Benchmarking Program, such as our carcass data and our intake data and a good chunk of days to calving data as well. And a small portion of things like retail beef yield data, which is our direct yield data where you go into the abattoir and bone animals out. So it's important in our reference population programs to really capture this particular data that's hard to measure, we don't normally get on farms, and feed that into our genetic evaluation to inform EBVs and increase accuracy of selection in the end. While the phenotypes are also important, what's also important is to make sure that the size and the genetics we are bringing in are also representative of the Angus population. So if we're bringing in genetics that weren't representative, the genomic information and the phenotypes we're bringing wouldn't help out in our selection much at all. But with our process and our support of our members nominating bulls and the AI companies, semen companies nominating bulls as well, we do have a really good representative group of sires. At this point in time, up to cohort 12, we had 402 sires go in, and we're averaging around 34. We're averaging 34 sires per cohort. When I look at how many progeny they have registered with Angus Australia, that's not just obviously within the ASBP, but across our membership, we're nearly up to 130,000 progeny registered by these 410 sires. So that in itself says they're pretty influential in regards to registered progeny. And obviously they go out in the commercial world as bulls, or sons of these particular bulls go out to the commercial industry and therefore have an influence on those situations. That's averaging around 330 progeny per sire. Importantly, when you look at the sires, they come from all states of Australia as well. And they also come from some of our key genetic sources, such as in the US, New Zealand, and a small amount in the UK. But particularly the US, we're getting more of those bulls in that have an influence on our reference population, but also the American reference population and the genetic evaluation as well. This table displays the top 20 influential sires that have been in the ASBP based on the number of registered progeny with Angus Australia. And there's a range of sires there. I'm sure most of our members have either used the sires themselves or definitely some of the sires, and there would be lots of sons and grandsons out in the commercial industry being utilised. So this is just again an indicator of making sure that we have a reference population that's representative of our genetics going out in the industry, and particularly the industry as we speak now, not 20 years ago, but what we see out in the commercial industry breeding our commercial Angus cattle. So in the end, what one of the main reasons is we undertake this program is really because our members are committed to increasing the accuracy of their breeding values, and there's more and more people now genotyping to do that. We now know we have about 170,000 animals in our reference population going into the genetic evaluation to inform breeding values. A lot of those have phenotypes attached to, which is fantastic. But really without a well-described reference population, genotypes doesn't mean much. So with the exponential increase in our phenotyping, and our genotyping particularly, what we really need to do is make sure we have a really good reference population so our members get the most value out of that, and that really fits into why we undertake the ASBP, relating back to the main objective of the project. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Steve Miller, Director here at the Animal Genetics Breeding Unit here in Armidale. And behind me is the AGBU building. And just beyond me, what you can't see is where a tornado ripped through a couple weeks ago and basically tore some mature gum trees to matchsticks and destroyed some buildings here on campus. Luckily, our AGBU building was spared, and so we're quite pleased with that. On campus this week, we had a hub for the Australian Association of Animal Breeding and Genetics conference. And someone mentioned something to me there which I think is relevant to what we're talking about today. And that is, they said, your genetic progress of today really defines your success of tomorrow. And I'd like to congratulate the board of directors and Angus members on prioritizing data. And that is, today we're talking about reference populations and how important they are. I think as breeders, you'll all realize just what a great tool genomic selection is for cattle. You know, you're getting more accuracy at a younger age and allowing you to decrease your generation interval, which increases your progress. As well, you're getting predictions now and breeding values on traits that are hard to measure and that you might not be measuring on your farm, but you're able to distinguish your animals. And this has been, I'd say, you know, genomic selection has kind of taken animal breeding and animal industries, not just cattle, but all industries, by storm, which has been amazing. So, with reference populations, with genomics, I think a lot of times breeders can look at a tool like that and say, well, it's kind of like magic. You know, I send away my DNA sample and I get back this information. And as here at AGBU, we've got the scientists that put the tools together that develop those predictions and the numbers that you use, the EBVs that are in your single step T-BLUP genomic evaluation, which really is world leading around the world. And you might think here as scientists, we say, okay, we've got, you know, say 50,000 or 100,000 SNPs on your genomic test, and here we've got maybe a big recipe book where we say, okay, this SNP increases birth weight by this much, and this one maybe decreases by marbling by this much, and we kind of come up with some prediction based on some predetermined formula, but it's not like that at all. And you have to realize that those genomic predictions, those EBVs, they're all driven off the data. Even the ones where you haven't collected data and you're relying on the genomics, that genomics is based off data that someone's collected. And that's where reference populations come in. Those genomic predictions are only as accurate as the data behind them. And through time, as we've learned more and more about applying this genomic technology, we've realized more and more just how important that data is and how big reference populations need to be. And in Angus, you're quite, you know, again, back to that statement about your genetic progress today defines your success of tomorrow. Rates of genetic change in Angus are high, and the breed's moving ahead, and because the breeders are using the tools, they're using the EBVs, and genomics is going to help you actually increase that even faster, and we can expect rates of progress to go up. And what we've seen in dairy cattle who have been at this longer and have bigger populations, their rate of progress has actually doubled since the influence of genomics. So the promise is there, but again, it doesn't come from nothing. It comes from data. And I see there's kind of two levels of reference populations. One is the reference population that you as breeders build every day. When you're out phenotyping your animals, taking measurements, accurate birth weights, accurate weaning weights, well-defined contemporary groups, all that recorded in a timely manner and sent into Angus, that is building a reference population every day. And right now in your Angus evaluation, you have close to 170,000 genotyped animals. Well, if those animals have phenotypes, that is defining the accuracy of your genomic evaluation in your routine analysis. So in some ways you can think, well, our reference population, we as breeders have built it, and you're going to continue to build it as you continue to phenotype and genotype. You're genotyping today because you want to get a prediction on that young animal, but realize that the phenotypes you collect on that animal basically builds a reference population for tomorrow. So I've often talked to breeders about, they said, well, now with genomics I can stop phenotyping. Well, not for very long, or that genetic progress that you're relying on today for your success of tomorrow is going to slow down. And so we've got to keep up the phenotyping in the herds. The other type of reference population is the one where Angus is making direct investments, and that's really for your hard-to-measure traits. And if we look at the reference populations in the Angus cattle evaluation today, there's basically 5,000 animals now with genotypes and phenotypes for hard-to-measure traits, those being carcass measurements and also traits like feed efficiency, which are more and more which are not simple for every breeder to measure on farm. So that's fantastic, 5,000, but actually over time we could say, well, is 5,000 enough, and could we stop? And what we know is there is no stopping because we have to keep the population current. You always want to have your modern day, today's genetics represented in your reference population. So a reference population of traits from cattle measured, 10, 20 years ago may not fit the cattle of today as well as current cattle. So it's at the moment it's going to be a never-ending process in terms of we got to keep phenotyping, we got to keep genotyping, and that's going to build a stronger and stronger reference, which is going to allow you as breeders to make more and more progress, steepening that genetic trend. And that steeper genetic trend, I think, is going to secure a brighter and brighter future for Angus down the road. Thank you very much.
So Steve, can you tell us a little bit about your operation?
I'm Steve Chase from Waitara, Angus at Training, Central New South Wales. We're both a commercial and seedstock operation and a cooperative herd as part of ASBP. We also background steer for stockyard lock feeders in Queensland, have a really good, really strong relationship with them. So we've been involved with Angus benchmarking this will be our 7th joining, I believe. So with those steers, we'll just part of our own bigger commercial program. And we sell 50 bulls a year and have a non-property sale and we'll probably join over 600 cows this year. So that's probably our program in a nutshell.
What has been your involvement in the Angus Sire Benchmarking Program?
We've been involved with Angus Sire Benchmarking for, I think it's 7 years. This is our 7th joining. We join all our commercial cows to about our 2-year-old heifers. Anything that's calved we have a 6-week joining, and anything that's calves in those first 2 cycles, we make sure that we get into the benchmarking program and give them the opportunity to AI. Yeah, we find it's been really, really beneficial to be part of it. We've learnt lots about our program. You don't get away with anything. Everything's checked off. And you learn so much about cattle. I believe our commercial cattle are probably as well recorded as many stud operations because of our involvement with benchmarking.
What value do you receive from being part of the program as both a cooperator herd and a general Angus breeder involved in both seed stock and commercial breeding programs?
As an individual, we get lots of value out of being part of benchmarking. As a commercial herd, we've been able to really understand. We know as much about our commercial herd as a number of as many stud operations would. So all our calves are weighed. We get full feedback on those cattle. We've got obviously any information that's turned into Angus Australia through benchmarking. We get access to that as well. So we know lots about our cattle. As a stud operator, I find that it really gives me some faith in the data where it's coming back through taste. I find it gives me a really good insight into looking at the data and looking at how it really truly reflects the cattle. You hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, breed plan doesn't really reflect our herd," but for us it does, because we've measured cattle in really good contemporary groups. I believe that it's really reflecting where the cattle are right now. So from that regard, that's a really good thing. Also, just being involved with Angus Australia and seeing all these add-on projects that come through benchmarking, I really value, and it also gives me some real enthusiasm for our breed. I believe that benchmarking is something that really stands our breed apart and gives us the ability to stay in this position where we are as the number one Boss Taurus breed in the industry.
What value does the program provide to the overall industry?
Benchmarking is a great tool in really understanding where Angus is, where it fits, where we can go better. Comparing it with the multi-breed program will be really interesting. It also provides lots of add-on projects through immune competency, various add-ons that allow us to, through methane emissions, net feed intake, all things that are driving our industry forward and making us more efficient and better producers into the future, and making sure we are cutting edge and the best cattle that we possibly can and provide the best beef product that we can do. What
does or should the future hold for the ASBP?
Through benchmarking, we've been able to get this really, really good reference population of cattle that we've got heaps of information. So for us, we've got 6 years of records. This is our 7th joining. So we've got a really good reference population. We want to be able to use that information that we've got, use that base to go forward, to keep measuring, keep finding things that we need to, we'll keep identifying things that will make our cattle better, make our breed better, testing sires that are coming for modern Angus bulls that are coming through, and allowing us to identify accurately these better end sires. Also, just to keep that, just to make sure we've got a reference for taste. We've got to be always making sure we've got that data there set there to make sure that the information coming out of taste is accurate. We also want to be able to have those cattle that are not only genotyped but phenotyped as well. So to really reference this, genomics appears to be a silver bullet, but it's only as good as the information that we cross-reference it with. So if we don't have phenotypic information coming back, genomics is only limited in its ability. But with the phenotypes that we've been able to get through benchmarking on lots of traits, not only the easy to measure ones, the hard to measure, and immune competency, carcass data, net feed intake, all those things, and there's more and more coming on every day. Structure is also a hugely important one. We need to have those phenotypes to be able to truly understand whether genomics is getting it right. I tend to believe it is. We need to have that background information, that those phenotypes that allow us to say, yep, genomics is getting this right. So that's probably for me where we need to be looking at with sire benchmarking, looking for those new things that are coming on, but also using that background or those building blocks that we've set up over the last 11 years to most efficiently use this reference population that we've built.
Thanks, Steve. As part of the ASBP, calves are comprehensively performance recorded. And for our next session, Angus Australia's Jen Peart and Jake Phillips explore the progeny performance data in more detail and some of the insights this information is providing.
Good evening, my name is Jen, and during this presentation we'll be having a look at the actual results of the progeny from sires in the recently completed Angus Sire Benchmarking Program Cohort 9, which were joined in 2018. Cohorts in the ASBP take a number of years to complete, as the progeny, once born, have to make their way through the production system or supply chain and are comprehensively measured along the way. Currently, Cohort 10 progeny are making their way through the supply chain, with steers being finished in feedlots and carcass traits being collected, while heifers are being joined and fertility traits are being collected. Cohort 11 calves are to be weaned shortly, while bulls selected for Cohort 12 are currently being joined with cooperator herd cows. The 21 sires used in Cohort 9 were selected through the usual nomination process, with the aim to select a variety of bulls representative of the Australian Angus population. This includes bulls with links to both previous cohorts and other Angus populations with which there is an exchange of genetics, such as New Zealand and US populations. In Cohort 9, these sires were Hazeldine Catson, K146, and Tamania Lancaster, L64. They were the links from Cohort 8 and not reported in the official Cohort 9 results. Sidgen Black Pearl and Thomas Edison 6764 are both USA bulls provided to the program by ABS. Also of note is the inclusion of Lawson Momentous M518 and Chilton Park Mo M6, who currently have some of the most recorded progeny in the Angus Australia database, with 2,800 and 1,000 progeny respectively. By generating progeny data, including hard-to-measure traits such as carcass traits on the progeny of these representative and highly linked bulls, helped to build the reference population for the wider population. As a result, the ASBP program aims to join approximately 40 bulls with cooperator herds and have at least 25 calves per bull in each cohort. Due to the severe drought conditions, restricted cow numbers, and the project funding cycle at the time, Cohort 9 was a much more conservative joining. The 21 bulls joined averaged 21 calves per bull, and a total of more than 5,500 pieces of information was collected on that progeny over their lifetime. So let's take a look at some of the data collected on Cohort 9 progeny. This information can be found in detail in the Cohort 9 Progeny Performance Report, which is available on the Angus Australia website. Birth data was collected on progeny of Cohort 9 bulls in 2019. These are the top 5 ranked bulls for both gestation length and birth weight. Interestingly, bulls with the shortest average gestation length did not have the lowest average birth weights in the group. Also of interest is the 3.4 days of variation in gestation length amongst the top 5 bulls alone. Moving on to growth data, and there is a lot more consistency in the top 5 sires across the 200, 400 and 600 day weights, with Pathfinder Masterpiece and Sidgen Black Pearl in the top 5 across the board, Dulverton Medea progeny ranking well in early growth, and Farrell Maxwell and Storth Oaks favouring late growth. The bull AJC L99 came from outside the top 5 in the other weight categories to average the 4th highest for average progeny 600 day weight. NFI in the top 5 bulls was relatively constant, with only 300 grams difference between the 5. Some of the bulls whose progeny averaged the heaviest for growth were amongst the top 5 for NFI, notably Sidgen Black Pearl, AJC L99 and Dulverton Medea. Carcass traits are the most recently collected information on Cohort 9 steer progeny. We'll take a look at carcass weights first, as it reflects the growth traits that we have just discussed. Unsurprisingly, the progeny of 4 of the top 5 bulls for 600 day weight averaged the heaviest carcass weights. The progeny of Tamania Magnate ranked 3rd despite ranking 19 in the 600 day weight progeny averages. In terms of intramuscular fat, both the MSA visual marbling score assessment and the IMF chemical analysis was taken on the progeny at time of slaughter. The objective of these measurements is to measure the intramuscular fat. However, they are considered to be different traits, one being subjective, the other objective. This is why we see re-ranking between the top 3 bulls for both traits, Lawson Momentus, Murderduke Novak, and Hardhat H708, and different bulls occupying 4th and 5th positions. The ASBP program is also the fundamental basis on which research and validation is conducted for new traits and research breeding values developed. Coat type is one of the RBVs being developed through the ASBP and now the wider Angus population, giving producers the ability to take advantage of variation within the Angus population and select for slicker coats if so desired. By utilising their progeny performance, primarily from the ASBP, the Cohort 9 bulls have moderate to highly accurate coat type RBVs and have significant variation in the expected expression of coat type in their progeny. Coat type rankings and results, as well as all other trait results, are available in much more detail in the Cohort 9 Progeny Performance Report. If it or any other progeny performance reports on previous cohorts is of interest to you, please access the reports via the Angus Australia website or get in touch with Angus Australia staff. Thank you.
G'day everyone, I'm Jake Phillips, Breed Development Officer with Angus Australia. In this session, we're going to cover the results of the latest Carcase Value research from the progeny data collected from Cohort 9 of the ASBP. The value of the carcass of a beef animal has arguably never been as high as it is now. Many factors around the world are contributing to a situation rarely seen in each lifetime, and that is causing a perfect storm in cattle price and world supply for beef producers. The other significant element being seen in Australia is the commercial demand for quality genetics and cattle, with much of our country continuing to rebuild on the back of a drought-depleted herd. Angus cattle are proving to be an option for many producers looking to again make beef breeding a strong component of their business. Today, we're going to have a deep dive into the carcass value that exists between progeny from sires in Cohort 9 of the ASBP. For those members and producers with an interest in keeping a close eye on the potential value of commercial animals being turned off the supplier premium market, this is sure to be an insight not to be missed. So please join with me and let's see which sires have staked their claim on top of the podium this year. A repeated study has validated the variation that exists in Angus carcass values. The study revealed an $800 per carcass difference based on carcass data collected in Cohort 9 of the ASBP. The study compared carcass values on a progeny average basis between the highest and lowest ranked sires. This difference has become greater in Cohort 9 based on some refined parameters, but also the significant carcass value being realised currently for MSA compliant commercially orientated carcasses with optimum marbling and fat coverage as well as eating quality, and many other parameters. The progeny average carcass values were derived by applying industry-based parameters to each steer, of which is 181, from Cohort 9 of the ASBP. The parameters are based on a general long-fed production system of more than 200 days with the aim of producing and selling high-quality Angus beef products. The following specific parameters have been applied to this year's analysis of the Cohort 9 ASBP steer carcass value data. An assumption of $8 per 50 carcass weight for an Osmeat Marbling Score 2 carcass, between $1.50 per kilo and $2 per kilo premium for marble scores between a 3 and an 8 on the Osmeat scale, $1 per kilo carcass weight penalty for carcasses that didn't make the minimum of a marble score 2 Osmeat, a 50 cents per kilogram penalty carcass weight if less than 7 millimeters of P8 fat, and a 10 cents per kilogram penalty carcass weight if that steer achieved more than 22 millimeters of P8 and less than 33 millimeters of P8 fat, and a 30 cents per kilogram penalty carcass weight if that steer achieved more than 33 millimeters of P8 fat or greater. These parameters are guides we have received from supply chain participants that process long-fed Angus cattle and market the beef globally. However, there are several items not captured which we will discuss later, such as retail beef yield and other considerations. This guide has again provided some significant differences between the progeny of sires, which allows us to potentially select sires and genetics to deliver a higher carcass value. Additionally, progeny average values, including carcass value, are calculated using a least squares means LSM model, which takes into account herd and other contemporary group effects. Based on these parameters used on Cohort 9 carcass measurements, the following sires have ranked in the top 5 for carcass value of the steer progeny. The main influences of carcass value remain to be carcass weight, marbling and commercial fat specifications. What the top 5 sires for carcass value tend to have in common is the ability to rank highly compared to other sires in the group for more than one trait. For example, the top ranking sire on carcass value is also the top ranking sire on osmeat marbling, the 11th on carcass weight, while the sire ranking 4th for carcass value also ranks 1st for carcass weight, 5th for rump and rib fat, and 11th for osmeat marbling. Remembering that with the commercial fat specifications influencing the value, more is not always more desirable, which is a great example of why working out where a sire sits in reference to the population for certain traits is an example of a great way to work through your breeding objective and selecting the right sires. The outcomes show that there is significant scope to select Angus sires and genetics for components relative to carcass value within your breeding program. As technology improves in the beef industry to measure the yield of a carcass consistently, more of this information will be included into the genetic evaluation. Some companies are already providing estimated yields and value-based marketing outcomes which deliver a price signal back to producers. While technology is constantly being developed to become better, faster, stronger, more reliable, more accurate and cheaper, the ASBP is also committed to collecting retail beef yield information on progeny when we can. Currently, this involves full bone out of sides of the ASBP steers and removing the fat and bone and lean meat for weighing to calculate the proportion of the total weight. This is an expensive and time-consuming process. We have some data that we have collected from this process where we collaborated with the New South Wales DPI, and we must sincerely thank them for their support in this area. This data has now been incorporated into the TASE analysis and is helping to drive the accuracy around retail beef yield by adding a lot more value to the program, which will continue to help position the ASBP as a relevant and extremely valuable progeny benchmarking program. Not all sires have progeny represented in the collection. However, if you have a particular interest, I would encourage you to head to the Angus Tech website and search the Cohort 8 catalogue and ensure that the Progeny Traits Count tab is selected to show which sires have progeny which have been included in the retail beef yield collection. We have also been collaborating with industry in the ALM Tech project, which is at the coalface of beef, pork and lamb eating quality and yield measuring technology, which we hope will enable the development of technologies to be able to assist us with some of the measurements being taken in the ASBP. So in summary, significant carcass value can be found in progeny of different sires. For Cohort 9, this is calculated at $800 difference between the highest and lowest ranking sire. Traits important to carcass value generally are carcass weight, marbling and compliance to commercial specifications. Commercial feedback has been used to develop these parameters. However, these may be different in your part of the country and depending who your clients are. However, the fact remains that there is still variation we can use to select sires that will have a variation in the value of their progeny. Retail beef yield will continue to become a focus of industry, and particularly processing companies, as the supply chain tries to extract the maximum amount of saleable beef from the carcass to supply its customers. And Angus Australia through the ASBP are committed to the ASBP until at least the end of 2029 and likely beyond. During this time, we are also committed to collaborating with industry to continue to develop tools and practices to help measure and evaluate the value of a carcass to ultimately end up with a more profitable animal.
In our final session for this evening, I'll begin with a presentation exploring do EBVs and selection indexes work, before handing over to Christian Duff to talk about some of the research outcomes and future opportunities associated with the ASBP. So as part of this next session, we're going to look at do EBVs and selection indexes work. EBVs and selection indexes are a valuable tool in modern Angus breeding programs, and it's important that we continue to demonstrate the value they deliver to breeding programs. So if we just start with EBVs, EBVs describe differences in the expected performance of progenies. But ultimately the question comes, how accurate are they at predicting these differences? And so there's two bits of data we require to do this, and we're really blessed within the Angus space to have the Angus Sire Benchmarking Program, which provides us with these two pieces of data. The first is the EBV of ASBP sires, and the second is their progeny data, of which the progeny are comprehensively performance recorded as part of the program. And so this bit of work examines progeny in cohorts 5, 6 and 7. So what we did was we ranked sires from highest to lowest based on their EBV for each trait, and then identified the highest 10 and lowest 10 sires and calculated their average EBV. We then calculated the difference between these two averages and halved it to get the expected difference. We then followed the progeny by these two groups of sires through the program and compared the two numbers. What we found was that EBVs provide a reliable prediction of the genetic merit of sires, as across the 12 examined traits we saw strong alignment between the expected difference and the actual difference. So we saw strong alignment between what the EBVs predicted and the actual difference we saw in the performance of the progeny by those animals. Now the two traits you'll note here that where alignment isn't as strong is carcass rump fat, which we believe to be a function of unintended abattoir effects as a result of the collection of the phenotype in progeny, and days to calving, which again we believe to be a function of how the trait's collected, that being whole days. Now this bit of work examined progeny as part of cohorts 5, 6 and 7, and it builds on earlier work which examined the progeny out of cohorts 1, 2 and 3, where again we saw strong alignment between what the EBVs predicted and the actual performance of their progeny. If we just break down a few of the traits in more detail, and starting with birth weight, what we see is that strong alignment throughout the 6 examined cohorts between what the EBVs predicted and the performance we saw in the progeny, which in this case is listed as LSMs. Moving to 400-day weight, again, pretty similar across the EBVs, but there was more variation in the progeny performance between the cohorts. Overall, though, we're seeing that strong alignment between what the EBVs predicted and the actual difference in the progeny's performance. Finally, IMF, so variation in the EBVs, particularly in the later cohorts, 5, 6 and 7, where the average of the high group is a little bit higher, but we're still seeing the expected difference and the actual difference showing that strong alignment, so it's good to see. Overall, the work has really demonstrated that EBVs are predicting the differences seen in the average performance of the progeny, and that breeders ultimately should have confidence that EBVs provide a reliable prediction of the genetic merit of sires. Now we've shown that EBVs are accurate, the focus moves to selection indexes. So selection indexes aid in the selection of animals for use within a breeding program where there are several traits of economic or functional importance by providing an overall score of an animal's genetic value. And they do this by balancing EBVs and associated weights based on specific scenarios. For this reason, animals can have the same index value but very different EBV combinations. And this is really critical when it comes to looking at validating indexes, as animals can achieve the same index value in a variety of ways. So we've demonstrated that EBVs going into selection indexes are accurate in predicting differences between the average performance of progeny. Therefore, in order to understand whether selection indexes are accurate, we need to examine whether the expected response seen in the progeny and whether that aligns with the index's expected response. And so again, we're looking at the sire's selection index and what occurred in the progeny. And the ASBP again provides us with the data we require. That's the bull selection index value, and then the performance of the bull's progeny, and importantly, as is the case with the EBV work, we have the breeding values calculated without the progeny being examined as part of this project included in their breeding values calculation. So we examined the Angus Breeding Index, the ABI. Now, just a bit of background on the ABI. This selection index is not specific to any particular production system or target market endpoint, but rather identifies animals that will improve overall profitability in the majority of commercial grass and grain finishing beef production systems. And again, we're examining the highest 10 and lowest 10 selection index sires and the performance of their progeny across cohorts 5, 6 and 7. So there's two ways to look at the response from the selection index in the progeny. The first is about examining the degree of difference in standard deviations that we saw across the examined traits. And the second is to look at the expected response in the performance of the progeny, so that's their actual performance difference, in a similar way to the EBV analysis. And we're going to look at both as part of this analysis. So if we just start off with cohort 5, looking at the standard deviation differences that occurred within the cohort, we see growth really driving the differences between the highest 10 and lowest 10 sires in terms of their progeny, with big responses in 200, 400 and 600 day weights. Moving to cohort 6, we see a much more balanced response across the progeny, with stronger alignment between the indicative response and the differences seen in progeny, with birth weight reducing and fertility, growth and carcass traits all improving, so very similar to what the indicative response expected. Finally, cohort 7, we see the carcass traits really driving the difference, with big responses in IMF and carcass rib and rump fat. So now if we just look at what occurred with the actual progeny differences, and we look at the average across the 3 examined cohorts, we see strong alignment between the expected response and the average progeny difference, notably though with greater response within the growth traits. Ultimately, what this demonstrates is that selection indexes are a valuable pre-filtering tool, but highlights the importance of going to that next level of looking at the EBVs driving the selection index value when making breeding and selection decisions. Overall, what do you take away from this presentation? Well, the work presented today has demonstrated that EBVs are a reliable indicator of the genetic merit of sires, and that selection indexes are balancing these EBVs in their calculation for a range of traits and can be a really valuable pre-filtered tool, but we need to go to that next level and look at the EBVs driving those. For further information on the work, visit the Angus Australia website, or if you have any questions, give staff at Angus Australia a call.
It's time to wrap up by talking about what's new and what's next with the ASBP, because while the program's core itself is quite well designed and we'll continue on doing what we do, there's always new stuff we need to think about in developing, and there's also what's next and what the future holds for the ASBP. Sam White's already mentioned at the start of the presentation, we are committed to funding the ASBP up to cohort 16 and hopefully beyond that. But basically this is about more specific things, what we're looking to do in the ASBP and what next. I suppose just from a general level, it all comes down to more phenotypes and genotypes. It really is a numbers game. So the more we can produce on contemporary animals, the better the information we can get from it, particularly for our members' selections in the Angus industry in general. And that includes keep contributing to the reference population and focusing on those hard to measure traits we get a lot from industry and from our members, such as our carcass and eating quality traits, our feed intake, feed efficiency traits, immune competence related to immune resilience and resilience traits, and our heifer fertility traits under natural joining. So the next 5 cohorts, 11 to 16, we plan to add an additional 150 sires of the reference population and around 5,500 animals, obviously half steers and half heifers, and record those hard to measure traits on those relevant to steers or heifers as such. One thing we're also starting to look at, which is related to the ASBP and our reference population programs, is can we also model some commercial data coming into a reference? They capture some value from the commercial supply chain, say for a trait like marbling or carcass weight, which is recorded regularly, if we can also get genotypes on those animals. So we do have a collaborative project with the CSIRO to look at that next year in 2022. And hopefully we can get some value out of those systems, and we can look to start bringing some more commercially related data and generated data into our reference population to not replace the ASBP, which is well designed and we get lots of data out of, but to really supplement it and add to it for some traits we can get value from. But in reality, we're really going to be focusing in the next few years, other than our core things and those hard to measure traits, some really new additional hard to measure traits, which I'll introduce to you now. So the first one that we're really excited about, and I must say this is just at final approval stage with MLA, so hopefully we do get this approved. So this is a project in collaboration with the University of New England and New South Wales DPI, where we're looking to record methane emissions through the emissions avoidance program on our ASBP cattle heading through Talimba. So basically what we would do, as well as measuring feed intake, which we've been doing for many years, we'll also measure their methane emissions, and that's obviously related to our climate change issues at the moment we need to understand, and really help us understand methane emissions from a genetic level. If we can select on methane emissions, and some early research would tell us we can, how would it affect other traits? So if we improve the methane emissions, reduce it out of cattle, how would it affect things like yield, growth, feed efficiency, eating quality, all those sorts of things. So it's a really important place to be, starting with phenotyping that we can build into the reference population program. So it's one we're pretty excited about, and I think talking to a range of members, they're pretty keen for us to get involved in this space as well, which is understandable given the importance of this whole area. Another area which is new, but it's an issue that we regularly hear come up from our members, both commercial and seed stock, is pink eye susceptibility in all Bos Taurus cattle particularly, but also Angus. We're not immune to that. So what we have is a collaborative project with CSIRO, where we're looking to define and record a pink eye phenotype. And I must say this will be done within the ASBP and within our own Angus Australia reference population, but also we'll be looking to deploy that out to other members who are interested in this trait to record it, particularly if they're genotyping animals, to hopefully develop an understanding of the genetics behind this trait, but also hopefully develop a breeding value for the future where we can select sires that have a lower incidence on the trait, as well as using our management and health techniques to try and reduce it as well. So this is something we're really interested to do, and that's something we're doing in collaboration with CSIRO. Another area where we're looking to instigate next year is to actually go back to a lot of our cooperator herds and identify cows that are still together as contemporary groups, particularly some of those older cow groups, and we do know there's some out there. So we're going to be going back and revisiting those herds and identifying those cow groups, and for those cooperator herds that are able to do so, with assistance from Angus Australia, go back and record a range of data on those cows. So cow height, condition score, feet and leg structures, udder, coat score, stayability, so on and so forth. So it's something we're pretty excited to do, and I think we'll get some really useful data out of it given the how long the project's been going for now, and something we look to build into future recordings as well. Another area that we also keen to keep looking at is the whole consumer meat quality side. We can't let that go. That's something that if consumers aren't happy with the Angus product, and we don't keep evolving it to suit the consumer of the future, then we're probably not doing the right job. So while we're going to be looking at cow traits and on-farm resilience traits like pink eye, I think we need to keep looking at our consumer traits, and fatty acids is one of those. Fatty acids is about the fat quality in reality, so it's about the meat quality coupled with the nutritional value for humans' consumption. And I guess the question around that is, in Angus cattle, if we're increasing marbling or we've got an optimum marbling in a product, can we also produce that marbling to have more healthy fats, such as more unsaturated compared to saturated on a broad level? So there's some of the things we'll be looking at for the future, and I think add pretty exciting aspects to the hard to measure trait angle of the Angus Sire Benchmarking Program. What we're going to be focusing on is building our reference, continuing with those hard to measure traits, and making that all come back into our genetic evaluation to inform breeding values and keep driving genetic gain for the Angus breed relative to what's important for the commercial industry and the supply chain. Thank you.
With that, we come to the end of another Angus Connect. Remember, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give staff at Angus Australia a call. The evaluation for this event can be found in the details section below, or by visiting the Angus Australia website. We would greatly appreciate you taking the time to complete the short set of questions on the event and the content delivered. And with that, we'll conclude Angus Connect for this evening, and hope you enjoyed tonight's event.